Okay, so you've got, like, Russian professor about 4 or 6 years ago predicted by now the United States would be in 6 distinct regions, and that hasn't happened yet. I think Americans, maybe not the strongest, but among the top with this American identity branding. Like, they've got the stars and the stripes and the pattern, and they really love America and the flag, and there's laws to protect the flag. And, you know, people say, I am an American. And I'm just kind of like, what would this secession look like? Because, like, Civil War happened, and the states, like, formed their own union, and then they went from Confederacy and then back to Union. And
they're forced back into that.
Well, sorry, just very briefly to interrupt there. I mean, the federal government could impose power in the Civil War because they were at the beginning of a fiat money printing cycle. Here we're at the end. Right. So there's nothing left in the magic bag. Right. There's no more rabbits to pull out of the hat. So there's no more bribery. Right. So how did the federal government assert power? By printing money and buying troops, which the states can't print money. Or at least they couldn't very efficiently back then. I guess they tried with the Confederate dollar, but now the tricks are all done. Right, the debt is massive. The fiat currency game is very. Everyone's aware of it since the Austrian economics movement. Everyone's aware that the inflation is the currency. So I don't think that there's a lot of magic tricks left in the status bag. Whereas in the Civil War, there was.
The state is really clever in being able to always, pull the wool over people's eyes.
Not always. End of the Roman Empire, end of the British Empire, end of the Russian Empire. There is a time where numbers hit you hard and you can't hit back.
Yeah, I mean, if it's your point of the state. People appealing to state as a magic trick to suspend the laws of economics is really interesting, and so just
the end of Terminator 2, he goes into the pit of lava and he turns into everyone he's ever seen. Right. You ever seen that? That to me is the end of the state. I'll be your friend, I'll be your tyrant, I'll be your. They just go into the lava and that's it. They're just trying this mutation stuff at the moment, but again, numbers are numbers. You can't beat math.
But yeah, are we getting what you said?
Yeah. What time have we got?
We have 35 minutes if people are up for it. They don't need to get...
Yeah, you don't have to stay to the end. We'll just keep talking to an empty room. I know I have. And then we'll start the history of philosophy.
Okay. So there's somebody over there. Yeah.
Another idea, thinking about the end of your movie and also the whole question about representation and who's going to this meeting. What if you took it as, okay, they blew up the Fed, that precipitated the fall of the U.S. economy, and then there was a year, maybe a 5-year period where things looked like they were staying decentralized, and now you've got actually 5 or 6 Feds starting to grow in each one of the regions, and there's a remnant of the original fighters in each region who see that it's slipping back. Yeah. And the meeting is how can they now fight 6 Feds instead of 1? And how can they fix what they missed last time?
Yeah, it's like the 12 regional... Actually, I did partially base this on where the 12 regional Fed banks were, but that's an interesting idea. How do they do it? Or some are more successful than others, so, yeah, interesting idea. So, but I am trying to, in this one, kind of like also move well beyond the Fed. I mean, the Fed is going to be kind of a... Federal Reserve will be kind of a symbol, but I do kind of want to show what it's like if people just start ignoring it and creating their own thing, and what happens, what kind of pressures are there. So, somebody else had a hand over here somewhere. Yep.
After just an analogy, I can't help but think of looking at this, and that's like the collapse.
Sorry, can you speak up? Just make sure we can get you an audio.
Yeah. Shortly after the collapse of the Roman Empire, there were people living in the ruins of what used to be state infrastructure, and they're taking it apart to sort of do their own thing and make their new lives. I was wondering if maybe you thought about incorporating that kind of thing into the...
Like that Fight Club thing where he talks about hunting elk down the skylines of Manhattan buildings and stuff.
You've got these like rebels who,
Yeah, the population of Rome went from over 1 million down to 17,000 in a generation. And they were all just pillaging copper. And
like, what would people do with all the collapsing state infrastructure? Would they take it to build new stuff, or that sort of thing?
Got a silver press in the White House.
Well, but sorry, the analogy of the fall of the Roman Empire is... Boy, I remember when I was young, the analogy of the fall of the Roman Empire, I think, doesn't work as well because the Roman empires were taken over by barbarians, right? So what happened was Rome they tried to conscript more and more, and so they were taxing and conscripting to maintain the military empire, which is not something that's happening in the U.S. at the moment, right? I mean, they're borrowing, but they're not conscripting. And so you can only conscript and tax in a city. But you can't go to, some country estate or some little farm somewhere, and it's just not economically efficient. And so what happened was you got a depopulation of the young from the cities in late Rome. And so you lost your tax base. This is going to happen as well. You lost your tax base, but here people would just go underground, right? But you lost your tax base, and you also lost the capacity to conscript people. So when you have an empire and you can't conscript, you have to hire mercenaries. Anyone recognize this story? You have to hire mercenaries, and then you have to pay the mercenaries. And what happened at the end of the Roman Empire was they ran out of money to pay the mercenaries. They weren't barbarians, they were mercenaries. I mean, they were hired to maintain the empire, and they came to Rome and said, give us our money. And they said no. And they said, okay, we'll just take Rome instead, and we'll break it up and sell it for parts on the black market. And so that's what they did. But this is not how this is going to end. This is not going to be, America's not going to be invaded by barbarians.
I was just thinking more along the lines of groups of people living in what used to be, a large, well-funded, states with infrastructure.
It will be turned through the free market to its most efficient use. Yeah. It's not going to go to the Dark Ages because there's just too much human capital. Like America and like Europe, America at the moment is in the process of consuming its capital. Right. The only reason there's not been a collapse yet is that there was a huge accumulation of capital in the post-war period. So everyone's going into debt. Everyone is, they're all just eating the seed crop. And so there will have to be definitely some sort of significant readjustment in the economy. But through that process, there will be a diminishing of control. And the state will try that, I believe. The state, this is part of what this scenario is like, is the tax farmers like, shit, we pissed off the tax cattle too much. We put too many controls, we put them in stalls too close to each other, and we're not making any money. So let's liberate them. And they'll turn on the dependent classes. They don't care. They'll just turn on the dependent classes, and they'll say, well, we got to buckle up, and, we got a new austerity, and, it's the new war on whatever, right, debt. And they'll just screw the dependent classes. That's what happened in Russia. You got these little old ladies selling photographs on street corners for lunch money because their pensions were worth nothing. Did the communist ruling classes care about that? Of course not. Because they used these people to get other people to give them money. Oh, you care about the poor. Give me your money. I'll take care of them. And then when they ran out of money, they just screwed the poor. The same thing will happen here. And then libertarians will be told once again that we don't care about the poor. And so they'll screw the poor, and they'll give us more economic freedom, and they'll try and reset the clock that way. But hopefully we'll be too smart for that trick. But
the idea of the visual of crumbling government buildings and people living in them or repurposing them is great. And I don't know if we'll keep it, but I don't know if you saw very briefly the Capitol building in our movie is cracked. Realistically, in our scenario, you may not do that because that would be like the first thing to be repaired. Is everything else that would be cracked. But during Jay's Drive, which you really can't see in the movie, it's
just take the old buildings.
Yeah, the government buildings are all nice and.
Now, if it's a true anarchic society, get a huge afro on the Capitol Dome, or just a mohawk.
A mohawk would be cool.
Capitol Dome, that'd be great.
A mohawk would be cool. So, all right. Any other awesome? Yeah.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One, I think you definitely, like what he was saying earlier, I think you need some stateless society that's you focus more on the ideal, and that's hard to work through it, I think. But I think that's important because ultimately, a lot of times when things collapse, that is what you have is, our history is we put things back together into collective entities, and, maybe they're smaller entities, but, I think those whole points are important to bring up, that kind of creates the new ability to tax and then ultimately, siphon off. And actually, as much as I love Ron Paul, I wouldn't actually exclude him from the hero worship thing. I think that's an important thing because there's plenty of that, and I certainly love Ron Paul, but I think that's important to note as well, that there's hero worship even within liberty. And so I think, what you said about it's an ethical question, unfortunately, in my mind anyway, most people don't make decisions based on ethics. But I think that's important that that's the argument that would ultimately win it, though, at some point. I think.
Yeah, hero worship is very dangerous because we're only going to be free when we as individuals feel that we're bigger than the propaganda. And hero worship is very dangerous because it makes the other person bigger, but it makes you proportionally smaller. And to the degree to which we surrender our power and our control to some hero who's going to save us is the degree which we make ourselves impotent, and it's very dangerous, I think.
Yeah. And you'll see in the movie, the current one, we don't mention who's president. They don't matter. they say, well, why don't you mention Ron Paul? He's like the one savior for us, and I'm a big fan of Ron Paul, but my response to them is like, well, you just trust government a lot more than I do. I'm working on the culture and I'm working on ideas, but I don't count on one person being president to...
Yeah, I mean, the politicos say one guy's going to save us, and the anarchists say, I don't like a system where it's even conceivable that one person is going to save us.
And I almost think you need maybe that person to somehow, I don't know if they get killed or something through some infiltrator or something, but to like kind of emphasize that. But the other thing too on the money thing, I kind of wondered on that honestly, because I mean we've had numerous examples throughout history of hyperinflation collapsing and then it gets replaced with something else. So sure. I don't know. I mean, I like your slavery analogy, and I think long term we're headed in the right direction. But I think it's going to be a lot of pain points to get there, and I don't know that just hyperinflation. I mean, we've got plenty of examples of extreme hyperinflation and being replaced with something very similar.
Well, let me tell you, this is going to be a very brief speech, but I feel very strongly about this, and I'm not claiming any capacity to predict the future. It may not be as bad as it could be. But I push people very hard to confront personal relationships and to bring the truth and the moral clarity of what we're doing. And it's not because I want to make people uncomfortable at their dinner parties or cause conflicts among families. I have this vision, this idea, I don't know if it's come true or not, but let's say that things do go really bad. Like we go Weimar to Nazi, which is, there's lots of examples of hyperinflation producing the French Revolution, guillotines and death camps and just monstrous things, right? I sort of have this feeling like if I hadn't been pushing my personal relationships really hard for the cause of virtue and truth, that we'd all sit there in fucking FEMA camps. And they'd turn to me and say, why didn't you push me harder? If you knew where we were going, why the hell didn't you push me harder? Because now look where we are. So I think that human beings either learn through unbelievably grim experience or they learn through people being really annoying and pushing them towards the truth. Right? Being that Socratic gadfly, not letting it go. Not for the sake of peace, because it does not lead to peace, to compromise with ignorance. So I think that it's up to us. If we can get people to understand, however emotionally uncomfortable it is for us and them, if we can get people to understand where the extrapolation of force leads, which is to tyranny and to possibly a human night without a dawn, then we can turn this thing around. But if we have to learn through experience, lots of people die. It's grim and it's nasty, but it is a bitter pill, or it's a lot worse. So that's that's what I continually push people. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm totally open to my being wrong, but I really think that's the way it has to be.
Well, and that's why I think it's so important that you've got to introduce that concept into the film if you can. I mean, it's a hard thing probably to grapple with because we don't have many examples of it, throughout history. But I mean, I think that's important to get out there.
Question in the back?
Someone talking about the generational divide in the movie, how it's like all the young people, but I think you may be shortchanging yourself, because if you're talking about creating a whole new society, you need all the generations working together, and we're talking something that's very close in our future, less than 10 years for the first movie, so the people who are, 30, 40, 50 years old in the movie, they're the ones who remember what it was like. I mean, the agent's dad was like, remember when beers only cost $4, now they're $90? You have people who have some real experience. Maybe there's people who were maybe a little too late, but remember, Europe in World War II, or went through the Argentinian currency collapse, or all these other places that they escaped that, came to America, and like, oh crap, it happened again. So you have people who maybe have some very practical, real experience and wisdom. So, all these.
Well, what's your personal experience been in that situation when you talk to older people? I mean, even older than me.
They remember.
What? Sorry? What? Sorry.
I mean, like my grandparents remember having to go through rationing.
No, not the remember. But sorry to interrupt. But when you bring the non-aggression principle, respect for property rights, all that kind of stuff, when you bring it to older people, right? Because I always go, what's the evidence, right? So when you bring it to older people, what's your experience been?
Generally positive.
Good.
So, I mean, you've got to, I don't necessarily, throw them into the deep end right away, but, working up that they, you agree to some basic ideas that you have in common. Like you said, do you love your children? You're not going to harm them. Things you universally agree with, and then you can build up.
But does it get to actionable? So let's say that Social Security gets cut or whatever, will they accept that as actions have consequences? You made choices and you refused to deal with the state, and these are the consequences. Would they get to actionable consequences.
You'd have to depend on the reasonableness of the person. If they're rational enough to see it through and realize that, crap, mistakes were made, versus someone who has just this hostile
Not
reaction.
mistakes were made. I made mistakes, right? I mean, that's the personal ownership, right? Because the elder generation, they certainly raised me saying that democracy allows you to control the government. And so clearly, since the majority of them voted for and have defended Social Security, this is exactly the system that they want. I was also taught that decisions have consequences that you have to accept. So if I forgot some test or didn't study when I was 7, I got an F. Right? So putting these ethics together, the elder generation does have a responsibility to really examine the causes that they've had in the growth of statism. And I put this video out, it's nothing new, so I said to the older people, look, if you controlled the government, then you get the government you want, it's not my fault, I'm not responsible for funding that which you really expected to get. Or you gave all your money to the government and said, well, I paid into the system, well, so what? Lots of people put money on 22 black and don't get their money back. Sorry, it's a gamble. There's no way to eliminate risk even with the state. In fact, the state makes it worse. Or they can say, I didn't have any control of the system, I was wrong to tell you that I did. Then I have a lot more sympathy. I'm happy to fund the old people. But they either have to say, democracy doesn't work, and therefore I'm not responsible. Okay, fine, then let's change from democracy to something else. Or democracy does work, and I'm getting the system I want, then you have to suffer because you've got what you want and actions have consequences. I don't know if there's any other way to do it, but that would be my approach. So if old people are interested in the ideas, and I think that's great, but if it comes to the point where somebody's going to have to suffer for all of these debts. I mean, I'd love to repudiate all of the debt. I can't snap my fingers and have that happen. But there's no money to pay for Social Security. No money at all. And so are they going to sit there and pillage the young who have much less economic opportunity and much higher taxes and much more debt than they ever dreamed of? I think that's, ideas come to life in action. And so that would be, if the older people are receptive to ideas to the point where they are willing to make sacrifices because of the decisions that they made or didn't make in the past, I think that would be how you'd know if they really got it. Does that make any sense?
Right, so the point was about, you're talking about the plot of the movie and, these movements that get created, I think it would be, to me it would be more realistic if you had, people of different ages and different backgrounds, who all saw, it's not just the teenagers from 20-something in this movie that see the problem and want to do something.
I mean, if Murray Rothbard was still alive, he'd be, ancient and completely heroic, right? So, yeah, you're right. It's not age-specific. I mean, I get lots of emails from people who say, I'm 70, I've been fighting this battle longer than you have, and yeah, absolutely, completely heroic, fantastic.
Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of perspective in working on this with Neil Smith as far as developing the story, which partially makes it a very badass story, but partially, he's been in libertarian circles, I don't know, forever. And fought with everybody on this stuff. It's interesting relationship, but he's, but just by virtue of having, fought with libertarians for 40 years, you see all these different sides and these different groups and different points of view unfolding through history, and I think that's really interesting. And that's what kind of makes it cool. And in particular, I'm looking at them for when this Freedom Summit comes together. What would be an interesting bone of contention? Forget about the state trying to invade them and all that. What are 2 points? What would be some sticking point between?
But what is the nature of the people at this conference? Are they are they a bunch of thugs trying to reinstate government to get power?
No, it's a bunch of. We see it as a bunch of sort of rebel libertarian groups that are sort of founding into these different areas and trying to come together to deal with a impending invasion kind of thing from the
now what historical
state.
Because the cynic in me would say that the closest analogy would be the founding fathers. And
maybe, yeah, but
okay, so no rights for women, no rights for slaves, no rights for children, and let's kill off all the natives, and then let's go right down the farmers in Pennsylvania for the whiskey tax and kill them all. So to me, that's just a bunch of thugs getting together, very well-spoken thugs and very nicely dressed thugs. Getting together to set up an interior. Sorry?
The wigs and stuff would be really
hot. Absolutely. With the wigs, I can understand how they're cranky, but I don't know if they're freedom fighters looking to liberate the world, or if they're a bunch of people saying, hey, let's have a meeting of the 5 families to figure out how we're going to...
Well, I think that's part of what could make it interesting. The answer is I don't know exactly, but...
It'd be interesting if they started out with the popular view of them like the founding fathers, and then you saw, as they began to have their infighting,
that this person's trying to get this.
It's the mafia.
Yeah, or just that 2 of these groups are positioning for mafia, and one person's being really pure, but they're being pummeled by the people that are better speakers, or are into the violence, and so that would be that's what starts to make it interesting. So especially because this whole summit ends in an attack by the state against them. So
sorry, Shade,
yeah.
go to you. Got something back there?
Maybe you can help drive it by what they're bringing to the table. Like this region has the energy, and this region has something. And it's a little bit of a negotiation around what they're bringing and what they want back. Part of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting because we are grouping it by that. So yeah.
Real quick, I thought one of the contentions you could have, if there's this impending attack by the state, you're wondering how they're going to fund some sort of resistance against the state that's coming in. They have a lot of the ideas where you have private security. Then there's always that argument, what about the people who don't pay into the private security? Should they be defended? How is their territory going to be protected by us? Even though they're not paying in, so we're paying it all in. So you can have some sort of contention where they're at this Liberty Summit they're having, and they're trying to determine how they're going to do this. If you just let people who aren't paying in just get wiped out by the state, but if they do that, then
the problem is that the people trying to control from the top down have a much better evil business case. It's like, lend me money for an army to subjugate this population, and I get half their income till the end of time, with which I can pay you back the money that... I mean, that was the argument for the Founding Fathers, you know. We'll take over, we'll go into debt, but don't worry, then we have a captive population we can tax and pay you back with. Whereas the people resisting they don't have the same good deal. They don't have the same deal to offer investors, because they'll just end up where they were before without any additional cash. They just want to have lost a whole bunch of liberty. So it's tougher to make that case. I think it will have to be driven ideologically. I don't think there's a good business case for resistance.
I mean, the whole pacifism thing is definitely in play in there too. I mean, there definitely are people critical of us in our movie just because we blow shit up and threaten people. But part of that is the movie making and storytelling that way. But part of it is we don't intend for the rebels to be angels here either. So and it creates that discussion. But that could be one thing, like how we can't defend ourselves. Or what does self-defense mean if you're really taking NAP seriously? Collateral damage, that kind of a thing. So, go.
Yeah. Just to hash out the Freedom Summit and the representatives that go into finer details. I see two separate scenarios. There could be a number of them, but. The representatives go and are genuine and legitimately want to form an anarchist government, but are not that philosophically enlightened, and then they are corrupted by the very act of trying to bring that about, because of maybe deeper psychological things or something, but or that there is like some that are naive and innocent and virtuous. And they go and they meet the other people from other regions, and they actually learn through trying to bring about anarchism from the evil of these other regions that anarchism is impossible. So,
yeah.
But power is physiologically addictive, so anyone who wants to go and negotiate for power over others, it's really fascinating because owning human beings is so profitable that we get a huge endorphin hit from having power, political power. You can measure the endorphins and the dopamine centers in the brain rise. As you can see this in monkeys, as they rise up the hierarchy, they get more and more. It's like a permanent, a wargasm that people get from going to the top of the hierarchy. And then if they get demoted, they suffer. They actually, the dopamine production shuts down. So when you go for political power, this is a meeting of people trying to get their heroin, who are desperate to maintain it. So it is not a rational process. Political power is incredibly addictive.
So that'd be a really interesting way to frame it. So it's partially a Freedom Summit or something like that, but it's partially they're trying to band against this threat, but partially these. In reality, it turns into this power grab kind of thing. Where
if you've ever dealt with drug addicts, or you've seen them on Dr. Phil, they're just compulsive liars and so on. This is why politicians are so false, because they're just trying to maintain this addiction that they have. And it's not just an addiction to power, it's an addiction to the natural opiates that get released when you achieve political power. It's the same for anyone in this room. If we were given political power, physiologically, I don't care how philosophical you are, this is like, I don't care how philosophical you are, 3 coffees and you got to pee. Right, and if no matter how philosophical you are, when you start to get close to political power, to violent power over other human beings, huge amounts of feel-good chemicals are released in your brain, and they become incredibly addictive. And this is why political power sustains itself.
And these characters may not even be conscious.
No, they're not aware of it. They just know it's like really great. And then what they do is they say, "I feel good because I'm doing good, not because I'm doing evil." Right?
That's fun because then it can be like the beginning of a. It's almost like this was almost the beginning of a state. I mean, this Freedom Summit gets interrupted in the plot, but people, if we could frame it so that like this is almost the beginning of another state where these things start to unify in a bad way.
And ostensibly good.
Yeah, for something that's ostensibly good, but hopefully we can present it in a way that the audience sees that they're turning into the enemy.
Oh yeah, in the state, Gollum always gets the ring.
Yeah.
always. No one loses a finger.
So yeah, but that would be fun.
I'll send you the science articles on this addiction stuff. It's really important, I think, for...
In a very recent, the most glaring example of that I personally have ever seen was Hillary Clinton's video saying, we saw, he died. She was as high as a kite talking about Gaddafi being murdered.
Yeah. I bet you measure with the Bin Laden murder, the dopamine levels will just go sky high. Oh yeah, self-righteous murder is probably one of the greatest highs that human beings can experience, which is why political power is so incredibly dangerous.
I haven't tried that, have you? Or?
No, I actually every now and then if I get one mosquito, I'm like, it even looks like I got a hit, you know, a little hole in my arm. But
it's like I can see their blood. Oh wait, that's my blood. Yeah.
No, I mean, and you talk to combat vets about this too. I mean, there is if you feel morally justified, obviously you go strangle a homeless guy, it's not the same thing. Trust me. But no, if you feel that it's morally justified, I think that, I mean, according to the studies that I've seen, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but it does seem to be real high. And politics is an incredible addiction. And this is why they go back for more. You know, I want to get reelected.
I've always wondered if somebody runs for president, does a job for 4 years, and has no liberty for the rest of their lives. They're living under armed guard by the Secret Service.
And it's not like they need any more money, right? Yeah.
I've never understood that.
I mean, they're desperate to want to go back because, you know, this is their dealer. I mean, this is what's so funny. You've got a war on drugs being run by drug addicts. I mean, seriously, it's exactly the same thing. It is, political power is scientifically measurable to be far more addictive than cocaine.
So would you frame so if we had to find a thing where they were trying to control some element inside of the Freedom Summit, say that there's a struggle over something, what's the thing they're trying to control? What's the thing
they're trying to make sure that we talked about that there's going to be a race to the bottom in terms of state power.
Yeah.
They're going to try and find that bottom. Say you can only cut your taxes by so far and no further. I mean, this is collusion. This is what happens in businesses. You know, this old idea, right? So they're going to have to try and find a way in which they're not going to steal from each other to go lower than, right? And that's going to be, now, that's one of the reasons federal government gets created, is so that each state can put a minimum that's federal, that nobody goes stealing their tax cattle from each other. So I think they're going to try and reach some sort of arrangement like that.
Is there something more interesting than taxes?
Immigration.
Immigration? That'd be fun. Is that what you said? External, yeah.
But you said that they were all, putting out information. It seems that someone would want to maybe stop that.
Yeah.
If they're there's one free entity, totally free, pouring out, come, you're not a slave, you're free, and their subnets are up or whatever, someone's probably going to want to, we got to shut that down, and that's, might be your reasoning for why.
Yeah, it's kind of like shortwave radio. The places that do the biggest broadcasting is like China and Cuba, and you can hear those clear as a bell on shortwave. Just propaganda all day. Some of it's kind of fun to listen to. But anyway, yeah.
I really think that the only issue and the most important issue isn't about the nuts and bolts of anything about how we're going to distribute silver rounds or how we're going to trade with each other. Because if these people are truly voluntarists and agorists, there's not going to be any discussion. People are just going to do. If I think that silver rounds should be distributed this way, I'm just gonna make it happen. And either you guys are gonna say that's a good idea and I'm on board with that and I'm gonna get on board with it, or it's gonna die because no one got on board with it voluntarily.
Right.
And it's as to whether this Freedom Summit actually does have any authority over us because they're all just self-appointed.
Sorry, there's one thing that I'm just reading The Hobbit to my daughter because it puts her to sleep every time. But if you've read the book, there's a scene with Gandalf and the trolls. The trolls capture all of the dwarves, and then Gandalf starts them arguing amongst each other until the sun turns them to stone or whatever. It'd be kind of interesting. Like if I was a complete voluntarist, I would go as a representative from the voluntarist state and just throw spanner after spanner into the works of all of the statists who are trying to collude to get them turning against each other.
It's like a Ron Paul delegate sort of.
Yeah. Just go in and he said, but didn't you just say earlier? And no, you guys were talking behind the scenes about this. We should really bring this into the open, and just keep screwing up the whole process. I think that would be your best defense, and that can actually be quite troubling.
The two biggest sort of conflicts that I see that I'm aware of out there. There's the non-aggression principle versus even more strict sort of pacifist approach. So that's out there, or defining what self-defense is and that. And then the other one is really, is money what makes it all go around, or is it the right to self-defense that makes everything go around? There are, especially more out west. Here more on the East Coast, we're into our money and into silver and into sound money. There's whole groups of people that really believe the core of their liberty comes from their ability to have a sidearm and to take care of themselves under all circumstances, and the money will sort itself out. So that's another two distinct points of view. I don't know how they would jockey for position in there, but if it'd be fun to kind of cook up a point somewhere in there where somebody tries to land, a power position inside that summit, and it sounds like it's good for the people, but it's really the beginning of a new state. Like they want to control the money supply or something.
It could just be social libertarians versus economic libertarians.
Yeah. Yeah, that stuff is, yeah, that's true. I'm going to be pretty flagrant about putting the social liberty stuff in there anyway, just because I think it makes it colorful and fun. So I might lose some viewers over that, but I'd rather have a pot-smoking lesbian in the movie than not. So you don't know she's lesbian yet, but she is. So. Anyway, yo.
What about if these people are trying to create these new societies, and obviously they see the actions of the Fed, they've got to be worried about an armed response,
right?
Probably militarily. So maybe a conflict is: do these states try to create their own military?
Right.
How much, which is a state institution. You can sort of do the militia thing, but at some point, I can see an argument like we need our own army versus we just need to be economically strong, and that'll keep them in the bed.
Yeah, like the whole standing army question, which we grew up in a society where we just take a standing army for granted, but there's something there. So that's kind of cool. That'd be interesting. So yep.
I'm not sure how compelling this would be for a movie, but it seems to me fundamentally that all human beings have this thing that we referred to earlier, that when you achieve power, you get this dopamine effect.
Yeah.
So, like if you eliminated the people that are trying to exert power over their neighbor, the next level down of addicts will attempt to rise up.
Right.
And so you have this never-ending problem. It seems to me to be the human condition that we will try to groom.
Human nature is a bad argument.
Yeah.
No, because, again, this is a book I've recommended before, well worth picking up for anyone interested in politics or improving society. It's Dr. Gabor Mate's. It's actually been on my show, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which shows that addictive behavior is born out of childhood trauma. So this is why I keep focusing on, raise children well and peacefully, and then you don't need that, right? So if you and I, frankly, if political power is addictive, the Constitution is just rolling paper. And I'd like to just pause to appreciate that other thing. Anyway, if you and I smoke a joint or whatever, we maybe feel happy and then we go back to a regular state of happiness. But if you grew up traumatized as a child, what happens is you feel happy for the first time fundamentally. And then you go back to yourself, which formerly was just yourself and now is a state of misery. That's why it's so addictive. Because you start down here, right? So normal people, they're happy to go to drugs. They come back, okay, they're happy. Don't need to do it again. But if you're kind of starting down here, you think that's normal, you go to a normal level of human happiness. When you collapse down again, then you realize how unhappy you've always been, and you've got to get back to that state. And so if people don't start down here, they don't become addicted. And his estimate is that more than 90% of addictions can be eliminated through peaceful parenting, through raising children peacefully and well. It's not human nature to need that level of dopamine. It's just if you're deficient because of an unhappy childhood, then, and in an unhappy childhood, physically changed the brain. You're short of dopamine, your endorphins production system is damaged. So then you have to get these addictions, and this is why this behavior is so repetitive. Because also, as he says, there's nothing so repetitive as something that almost works. Right, so because if you're low on this stuff to begin with, and then you artificially stimulate its production, when you collapse, you're even lower. Right, so this is why it has to be. But if you start from a normal state, you don't enter into that vicious cycle. So I don't think we will have a whole bunch of people looking for political power if they're raised peacefully and well. You get love and happiness instead, which seems like a pretty good trade-off.
But I was referring to this scenario where you have the population that's left in the United States. You know, they're not all going to be well-adjusted.
No, but if people in general know about this stuff, right? Bad childhood, low dopamine, you want political power as a way of avoiding dealing with your history, then you don't have to have everyone be healthy. In the same way, you don't need everyone to not be a racist to have a non-racist society. Racists just have to be jerks, right? I mean, you just have to say, oh, he's a racist, he's a jerk. Doesn't mean you have to change him. It just means he's not going to get any power in society, even though he's a racist and a jerk. Right? And so in this situation, yeah, there'll be people clamoring for political power, but if everybody understands this relationship, they'll be like, oh, this guy's just avoiding his bad childhood, he's trying to self-drug himself with the political power, he's a jerk. And he's not going to get, you don't have to fix everyone, you just have to have everyone generally understand why people are like that, and then they won't take them seriously. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that would be an angle that could be worked in.
That'd be fun. That'd be really interesting. I mean, and it again kind of comes down to what they're doing to the to the former U.S. government, where they're just starting to ignore them. And it's like this Freedom Summit Council thinks that they're in charge. Well, we don't think so.
Yeah, I'd like for people to come back with a bunch of laws and we just look at it like they're vacation photos.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff Berwick
talks... It was fun if you were there, but
Yeah, Jeff Berwick is here somewhere. He talks about like how in Mexico, laws, especially gun laws and drug laws and that kind of thing, are much more stringent than they are here, but people just don't take the government as seriously as they do here. So it's, everybody has guns. And
Sorry, where was that?
Jeff Berwick, he runs dollarvigilante.com.
He lives in Mexico.
Lives in Mexico, or he's kind of advocating just getting the hell out of the United States as soon as you can. Well, I'm not going to compete with the Big 8 dance party, but thank you all for coming, and feel free to talk with me, throughout, either online or come by our tent. I'll be here through tomorrow and tomorrow night, I think, and sorry for the spoilers as far as what we're doing in the future, but that is, like I said, the series is really about people like us inside of really extraordinary situations, and the best way to learn about it is to talk to people like us. So here we are.
For the video, mine's at freedomainradio.com, my show, which you've been on, and then so we'll hopefully do some more publicity for
definitely.
you guys as well.
Yeah, and we're silvercirclemovie.com. And then
thanks, everyone. Big hand, big question.